Good morning. We shall begin with the third chapter from the history section, that is the Revolt of 1857. Now, the Revolt of 1857 is associated with different names by different historians. It has been termed as a Sepoy mutiny because writers such as Sir James view it as a mere mutiny of the soldiers. Now, here, what do we mean by the mutiny of soldiers? It was a revolt. It means a revolt where the Indian soldiers they participated. So this is the meaning of Sepoy mutiny. Secondly, it has also been termed as the first war of independence by the Indian nationalist leaders such as Veer Savarkar, as the revolt included the participation of both the Hindus and the Muslims. Now, here we need to understand that earlier, the Hindus and the Muslims were in constant conflict with one another, but now they were united against a common enemy, which was the British. However, we still find that some historians do not agree to it being the first war of independence. Why? Because the concept of we feeling had not developed and the revolt was concentrated only in the few pockets of North India. So here we see that the revolt was only concentrated in the northern parts of India and to a certain level the central part of India, and it did not affect the entire Indian territory. Now we come down to the causes of the revolt. Under the causes of the revolt, the causes has been classified under different topics. The first that we deal with is the political causes. Let us now look into them. Number one, we have already studied in the previous chapter about the doctrine of lapse and the subsidiary alliance, which greatly weakened the Indian kings. These actions of the British created bitterness among the Indians and developed hatred towards them. Moving on with the second cause under the political causes. Secondly, the British introduced various policies of expanding British territories in India, which created suspicion among the Indian rulers. So, the British, we find that they were mainly interested in producing new strategies and policies which would give them more power and control of the Indian territory. Moving on with the third one, the Indian rulers who were enjoying pensions and titles. Pensions, we mean the money or the allowance that was given to the king after they retired, or even if the king died, the family would be given pensions. And titles here mean certain titles which the king enjoys, like Nawab, etc. Was discontinued by the British, which created discontentment among the Indian rulers. So naturally, if the British, if they are going to discontinue or if they are going to cancel the titles and the pensions that they were enjoying earlier, the rulers or the kings are definitely they are bound to get angry. Now we drop down to the economic causes. The first economic cause was the rates of revenue, which were too high for the poor peasants. By peasants, here we mean the poor farmers. Revenue here means the collection of the land tax from the peasants. So the peasants who are working in the fields, okay, they had to pay certain amount of money for the land that was being utilized by them. The peasants had to pay huge sums of money to the zamindars who were appointed by the British, which created misery among them. So, see here, these peasants who are already poor, all right, they had to pay a huge sum of money to the zamindars who were actually appointed by the British officials. This misery of the peasants soon brought dissatisfaction against the British. So we see here that even at the lowest level, all right, at the ground level, where agriculture in the agriculture sector who are associated, where the farmers are associated with it, even they are dissatisfied with the British officials. Secondly, many British officers captured the land of old zamindars in different parts of India and made them landless. So zamindars here, what do we mean? It means those people who have large tracts or acres of land under their control, the Indian zamindars. This act of the British brought anti-British sentiment. By anti-British sentiment, what do we mean? It means resentment against the British, okay, anger against the British or hatred towards the British. Next economic cause was the problem that greatly affected the artisans and the craftsmen. Now, the British brought back ready made goods manufactured in the industries from England, which were sold at a very cheap price in the Indian markets. So, again, another strategy or another, you can say, measure that they have adopted is whatever products were being manufactured in the European countries, those products were again brought back to the Indian subcontinent, and they were sold at very cheap rates. Now, because of this, what happened? The people, the Indian public, they were more inclined towards buying the cheap products, all right, and they neglected those products which were manufactured in the Indian small cottages, the small cottages of India. Why? Because these products, which were manufactured in the small scale industries or the Indian small scale cottages, these were very expensive. So naturally, the people went for the cheap products which were brought by the British. Then we have, so this, what did this do? So this ruined the Indian craftsmen and the artisans. Another economic cause would be the exploitation of the Indian wealth and the resources. The British had totally exploited the Indian resources, making India a rich country very poor. Adding to this, England was soaring at its peak under industrialization. Now, we have already discussed what industrialization is in the first chapter. That is when the mode of production changes from hands, all right, or from manual labor to mechanized advanced machines. So that is the meaning of industrialization, making huge profits, but India was at a slow process of development of industries which created more problem among the public. So here also we see the problem or the grievances of the people. Now we move on with the social and the religious causes. What do we mean by the term social and religious causes? It simply means the rules, the practices, and the customs that were followed in the Indian society. Point one is the abolition of sati. Now, sati was a long held practice that was carried on in the Hindu custom and society. The woman had to sit on the husband's pyre and surrender her life to death. But with the British intervention, this tradition came to a halt, which angered the Hindu pundits. Also, the legalization of widow remarriage. Widow remarriage was looked down upon by the Orthodox Hindus, and women's education, which was not allowed at all in the Indian society, was introduced by the British, made the conservative or the Orthodox Hindus restless. So we see that not only in the economy, not only in the political affair, but the British, they have, they are interfering into the social and religious causes, sorry, the social and the religious aspect of the Indian people. Moving on with the second cause, now we need to understand during this time many missionaries came to India, all right, who wanted to convert people into Christianity, mainly the Indian people into Christianity. And some sections of the Indian did accept Christianity as there was no caste system in this particular religion. And as we know that the caste system was very well rooted, it was a social evil which was, taking place or which was functioning in the Indian society. This attempt of the British people brought fear among the Indian people. So, since the Indian system had this social evil, that was the caste system, which was very rigid and which was very stringent, those lower caste people, they wanted to shift or they wanted to convert to Christianity because there was no differences or no classification, no segregation, all right, in Christianity. So hence people were now trying to convert into a different religion which did not bring about any segregation or classification. Thirdly, the British switched from one policy to another, stringent measures to create problems among the Indians. So the British, they always wanted to create problems among the Indians. They now started to collect money and taxes from the lands on which temples and mosques were built. So this is very amusing. Why? Because the British, they came from a distant land, they came from a foreign land, and now they are taxing the lands which actually does not belong to them. It belongs to the Indians. So here we see how the British, they have developed this power, they have developed this control over the Indian territory. This step of the British greatly hurt the sentiments of the two communities. By the two communities, here we mean the Hindus and the Muslims. Another humiliating factor that the British adopted was racial discrimination. Now, many of us have come across this term, which simply means to create differences based on the skin color, your origin, or to any particular group that you belong. Indians were not at all given high ranking jobs. So, see here, they were the Indian public or the Indian people, they were not at all given high ranked jobs and no promotions at all. Only the British officers were ranked in high post, and the and the Indians were not considered worthy at all. So, no promotions, no high ranked jobs for the Indians. All right, it was only meant for the foreigners or the Europeans. Another very important feature that was rooted in the Indian society was the caste system. As already discussed, we have done this. The caste system was followed very strictly in the society. But now, this caste system was disturbed as the British placed Indians belonging to different castes in the army, prisons, and railway coaches all together. Now, the caste system is being hampered. All right. Why? What is happening? Because the British, they are not segregating or they're not classifying, those people who are in the prison, those people who are traveling in the railway coaches, they are not being given separate seats, or they're not being given separate prison cells to the high caste people or to the low caste people. Nothing of that sort is happening. All of them are put together into the same place or into the same coaches. So because of this, what was happening, the caste system was being disturbed literally. This greatly brought resentment among the high caste groups, because to even sit near a low caste or to even see the face of a low caste by a high caste was a taboo. Next, we move on with the military cause. Now, the first one, under the military cause, the first military cause that brought hatred towards the British was the salary differences. The Indian soldiers were considered inferior by the British and hence paid less than their European partners. So, see here the difference just arise. This treatment of the Indian soldiers increased their hatred towards the British. So, obviously, you are in the same rank, all right. You're in the same rank, but what is happening? Your European partner is being given a higher salary, but you are being given a lower salary. So this was the difference that arose, and it led to the hatred towards the British. Next, promotions of the Indian soldiers were very limited. So we've dealt this in the earlier cause as well. They could not be posted beyond the rank of a subedar. So only subedar. Indians can only be subedar and nothing more than that. From here, we see a lot of injustice was faced by the Indians. Another cause that shattered the faith of the Indian sepoys was the introduction of the General Service Enlistment Act. Now, what was this act? According to this act, it was compulsory that the Indian sepoys rendered their service overseas. But among the Indians, traveling overseas was forbidden and was seen as a taboo according to the Hindu norm. So the Indians could not travel overseas. They could not, travel through waterways. Why? Because it was a taboo. It was forbidden. All right. But with this enlistment act, what was happening? The Indian sepoys, they had to travel in case there was war in some foreign country. Now, we come across a new term called bhatta. Bhatta was the money that every Indian soldier received for providing service overseas. But soon this was stopped and no money was supplied to the soldier. So earlier, these soldiers were receiving bhatta or an allowance when they served overseas. But now, what happened? Even this bhatta was cancelled. To an extreme level, the British triggered the sentiments. So, this is the next point. The British triggered the sentiments of the different Indian communities when they forbid the soldiers the sectarian marks. Now, what does sectarian mark mean? It directly refers to the marks or the symbols like the turban, the beard, or the tilak with which a community is identified. For example, if I ask you, with which community is the turban identified? All right, then you will be giving the answer with the Sikh community. So this hurt the different community Indian soldiers and developed resentment against the British. Now, these Indian people, these Indian soldiers who belonged to various different communities. They were not even allowed to put tilak or turban or keep beard. All right, these were all removed by the British. Lastly, we come to the immediate cause. Now, what was this immediate cause? In 1856, an Enfield rifle was introduced in the army. It was rumored that the cartridges of this rifle were smeared with animal fat. Smeared meaning it was greased with animal fat. All right, and it could be any animal. It could be pig, anything. Now, before using this rifle, the cap had to be bitten off by the mouth. This, for both the Hindus and the Muslims, was against their religion. Hence, they refused to use it. Here we see the introduction of Mangal Pandey, the significant figure of the revolt of 1857. He was the person, or he was the sepoy who belonged to the 34th Infantry at Barrackpore in West Bengal. He gathered his fellow sepoys. Fellow sepoys here means the sepoys who worked with him to revolt against the use of the cartridges. But what happened to him? He was arrested and he was hanged to death. So, whatever efforts he tried to bring into this revolt, it was all a failure. So, from the above topics, we see there was a diverse range of causes that led to the revolt of 1857. Now, the other subtopics that we have in this chapter are spread of the revolt, and here you mainly have to learn where did the revolt spread, in which areas or in which states. All right. Now, the spreading of the revolt, the main centers, and the suppression of the revolt, these subtopics can be just read by you. It does not need any explanation because it just tells, or it just explains which states, which places were affected by the revolt. So for today we shall just complete these many topics, and on Saturday we shall continue with the remaining.